Morning, John. Good morning.
Welcome, Tom.
Oh, sorry, I didn't realize I was muted. I said Boker Or, and I hope it's a good morning for our brethren in Israel. Yeah. You know, oh, you're on mute too now, Jabir.
Yes, I am. Yeah, good afternoon for them now. So only a 6-hour difference this week.
Oh, they had their daylight saving time. They switched.
Yeah, they do that in Europe also.
Oh, okay. And I think we do the second Sunday of
No, we're doing it.
November.
I think
We do the first Sunday after Halloween.
which is this weekend.
Oh,
Actually, Halloween is this evening, so it's
Yeah.
this weekend that the
oh, it's this Sunday we're changing? Oh,
yes.
Yeah, so people
All
who
right.
so
Daylight savings time ends this Sunday. Oh.
So people who just came back from Europe lost an hour's sleep last week, and they're going to do it again.
Oh. Yeah.
You gain an hour in the fall.
Right. We get it back. Hello, Monica and Janie. Because the article I was reading said it's also a PR war as well as a physical fighting war. Yeah. Hey, Amy. Amy, how was your trip? I want to know. Oh, you could tell me privately. You don't have to use time now. Yeah. Hi, Rabbi. Yeah.
Everyone, Boker
Morning.
Tov.
Boker Tov.
Share the source sheet in the chat for you, Janice.
Thank you. Nothing has come out. Oh, there it goes. Thank you.
Share screen as well. Oops. Excuse me. Okay. Can you see the screen okay? Can you see the source sheet? Okay.
Good.
Fantastic.
Oh,
Okay.
you sound hoarse.
I'm okay. I was just clearing my throat, but thank God. Right now, feeling physically okay. Mentally, that's another story.
Before we start, I just the one thing that kept running through my head was, years ago when Josh was in high school and he was part of that I guess it was through B'nai B'rith, the group of with all of the different religion the kids got together and they met at different places, and we went to the mosque, and I just remember the imam talking about how Ishmael was the one that Abraham took up on the mountain to sacrifice, and I'm looking and I'm like, I don't get where that even comes from and why they even think that.
Mm-hmm.
I've studied with imams before, and they've opened up the Quran to show me that in the Quran, the version that they have is that Abraham took Ishmael.
Yeah.
So I don't know, the origin of that, but certainly in their primary text, that Muhammad received or wrote, I don't understand or claim to, explain it properly, but that's clearly the text that they do have.
Yeah, well, we know one thing for sure that they gloss over, and that's that
What?
Muhammad and most of his
Are you
followers were
calling to me?
illiterate.
What did you say, Amy?
They were illiterate. They couldn't read. Muhammad couldn't read. That's one of the reasons why they all have to memorize the surahs or whatever they memorize them, because most of them don't read.
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
and Muhammad couldn't read either. So it's, whatever he said, and maybe somebody wrote it down, and maybe they just wrote it down wrong. But that's something that they gloss over. This is an illiterate people. I
At
mean,
that-
now people can read, but in those they carried the Quran, but they didn't read it. They memorized it because they couldn't read.
At that time, no matter what country you were in, it was less than 10% of the people who were literate.
I mean, that's
Indeed.
why the Torah was read on Mondays and Thursdays at marketplace, because Jews couldn't read. It was read out loud to them.
Yeah, there were higher literacy levels among Jews, but not so much higher. It was still mostly an oral culture, where people learn by memorizing and not by writing and reading. So let's shift to the parsha for the week, and this Shabbat is the Shabbat of hospitality, of Hachnasat Orchim, as we are familiar with from the opening scene of the Parsha, with Abraham sitting post-op at the edge of his tent with the sun beating down, looking over the horizon as he sees three individuals walking, and he gets all excited. He runs towards them and seizes the moment for inviting guests into his home. And because this is the sort of parsha of hospitality, there has been a movement, we could call it, called the Shabbat Project, which was founded 10 years ago by the chief rabbi of South Africa, Warren Goldstein. Very dynamic, charismatic man I've met several times. And when I was a rabbi in Toronto 10 years ago, we really took this project very seriously, and we had community meals, and we had a Shabbat Project concert and a Shabbat Project Havdalah. And in our community, we've done it a few times here in Sharon. We've done a concert before, and every year we try to emphasize the core Jewish value of opening up our homes to others. This year we had planned, through various Jewish institutions, the Orthodox Union, Rabbinical Council of America, National Council of Young Israel, to make a big push to mark the 10th, anniversary of the Shabbat Project by encouraging everyone to invite someone from outside their immediate community, a Jewish neighbor, colleague, to Shabbat, dinner or lunch. However, other things have sort of taken up the energy, the focus, and so we have not. I have not really made a big push for it, and neither have the various sort of organizations within the Jewish world. But I was listening to a story from Reb Tzvi Hirsch Weinreb, who said that he was once visiting his elderly rabbi on Sukkot, and they were talking, and the rabbi it was in his apartment, and the elderly rabbi said, "I'm hungry. I want to have some lunch, but I am too old to make it down to the sukkah. It's too uncomfortable for me to go down the stairs, and so I am exempt from the sukkah. Mitzdayer pater min hasukkah." And so he said to Rabbi Weinreb, "I'm gonna take some food for myself and eat it in here, and I'm gonna give you some food, and you should go down the stairs and eat in my sukkah." So he listened to his teacher, he took the food, he went down to eat in the sukkah. And then, as he was finishing his meal, he heard footsteps coming down the stairs. And he looked up and he saw that it was his rabbi walking down the stairs very slowly. And he said, I thought you weren't able to make it to the sukkah. And the rabbi said to him, yeah, the mitzvah of sukkah has an exemption if it causes too much stress and too much struggle. But the mitzvah of welcoming guests does not have that exception, does not have that exemption. And so you're my guest. And so I'm going to make every effort, even though it's a struggle and even though it's a challenge. I need to greet my guests. I need to sit with them. So I'm not going to be eating in the sukkah, but I'm going to sit with you to make you feel welcome. And so that story stuck with me and made me realize that, yes, it's uncomfortable right now. Things are tough. The fog of war is very thick. And our minds, our hearts are in Israel. We are a little, scattered, and, we're a little or a lot anxious. But even though that's the case, we're not exempt from having guests. And so last night, I went over to the neighbors across the street from me on Ames Street. I'm not sure if you know them, Amy. They are your neighbors as well, living in that white house right across from me. It's a Russian Jewish family. They send their kids to Rashi. And we've had lovely, short encounters over the years. They moved in 2 or 3 years ago, and I invited them to Shabbos dinner.
Oh, okay.
Very nice.
They appreciated it. It happens to be this Friday night isn't going to work for them, but hopefully next Friday night we'll get them. And I'm embarrassed to say I've never invited them over for Shabbos dinner. I think they've been here, maybe 3 or 4 years. Obviously, some of that was COVID and everyone was uptight with guests, but we have many other guests from within the community, people we know. We have a long list of people that we want to be having over. So I share the story just to encourage, those of us who are able to follow up on this sort of Hachnasat Orchim Shabbat. It's only Tuesday, and so there might still be time to reach out and invite someone who is unaffiliated or somebody, who would really appreciate a Shabbat meal, whether they're in their community or not in the community. And to stretch ourselves a little bit, because this is the Shabbat where Avraham, who was healing from a pretty significant operation at the age of 99, he didn't exempt himself from Hachnasat Orchim either. Just like that rabbi who came down those rickety stairs very slowly, he put himself through physical, struggles to have that opportunity for that mitzvah. So I might still try to send out an email to encourage people to do so. And those of you who are here, make an effort, whether it's this Shabbat or next, to do what Avraham did in terms of opening up his home, even under difficult circumstances. So with that in mind, I want to delve into an aspect of hospitality within our Parsha from an unusual angle, which is not the opening scene of the Parsha that I described earlier. I want to try to take a scene from the end of the Parsha and then work our way backwards. Now, before I even start to examine the end of our Parsha, I want to share that I'm going a little off script here in terms of the book that we've been using, Vivian Skolnick's book on psychological insights into the weekly Parsha. Because the analysis that she took this week, the analysis that she made this week, I was not convinced by. And so this is almost a response to her, and a very different way of looking at Abraham's character. I'll just share, briefly what her analysis is that in Parshat Vayera, our Parsha this week, first we have that scene of the hospitality, then we have the episode of Sodom, and then we have the birth of Yitzchak, then we have the banishment of Yishmael into the desert, and then we have the Akedah. So there's a lot going on in the Parsha. And, Dr. Skolnick, who is a therapist and always looking at things in terms of the sort of the psycho through a psychodynamic and psychoanalytic lens, says Abraham is not such a great father. The two main episodes in our Parsha relate to creating significant distance between him and his two sons. The first with Yishmael, he just gives him some, supplies and sends him out to the desert. And then, a short while later, he is willing, to lift his hand towards the sky and to, sacrifice Yitzchak. And so Dr. Skolnick suggests that this emanates from the way that Avraham related to his father. Just as Avraham, rebelled against Terach, smashed his idols, tried to disprove his, way of life, and then, answered the call of Lech lecha me'artzecha umi moladetcha umi beit avicha, right? He was asked to leave his father's house, and Abraham did. He abandoned, his father, and that there's sort of a pattern that follows that, right? Just as Abraham had a fraught relationship with his own father, he repeated that with his own sons. So I can appreciate that that lens, but I think there's a lot of holes in that analysis, given that most of the reason for Abraham creating distance with Yishmael and Yitzchak had nothing to do with Abraham and more to do with Hashem's command to do it. And additionally, we don't necessarily know that Abraham and his father Terach had such a fraught relationship. What I shared last week is that Abraham was actually picking up from the journey that Terach started to go to Eretz Canaan. And so maybe there was more continuity there and more of a healthy father-son dynamic than we sometimes like to think through the Midrashim. So another way that I want to try and not disprove, but just push back against that thesis, that analysis of the characters in the story, is through the lens of hospitality. So with that sort of background in mind, let's look at source number 1 here, which is towards the end of our Parsha. There is a very strange description of something that Avraham does. Let's see. Who would like to read this pasuk? I've been talking a lot. So Janie, do you want to read this one for us? Oop, I think you're still on mute.
The English?
Sure.
Okay. Avraham planted a tamarisk at Beersheba and invoked there the name of Hashem, the everlasting God.
Okay. So I guess Abraham was some sort of gardener, and he liked planting things. And so the Torah notes at the conclusion of our narrative that Abraham planted an ashel tree, which I guess the English is tamarasic tree. I don't know, what sort that is, but what I do know is that there is a debate as to what this tree or what this item was that Avraham planted. So Rashi cites the two views on what this ashel was. He cites in source number 2 here, Rav v'Shmuel. So Rav and Shmuel disagree about what this was. Chad Amar Pardes. One says this was actually an orchard. Lahavi mimenu peirot laorchim b'seuda. And what was the purpose of planting an orchard? So that there would be lots of fruit. There would be plenty of delicious, scrumptious, sweet, I don't know, we're in the land of Israel, so let's say pomegranates and oranges, right? To give to his guests. that's one perspective. V'chad amar pundak la'achsanya ubo kol minei perot. Others say that it was like a hospitality suite or an inn for lodging, where there was a nice continental breakfast, right? This is like a bed and breakfast kind of setup, where Abraham lay out a basket of fruit on the nightstand of his bed and breakfast. And so obviously we have to think about how that second view fits into the words of the pasuk. The pasuk says he planted, right? Can you plant an inn? And so Rashi addresses that question, where he says, "Umatzinu lashon niti'a be'ohalim." We have found the usage of that verb to plant with regard to tents. Shne'emar vayita ohale apadno. That in Sefer Daniel it says that they planted, the tents of the palace. So based on that precedent, we could, justify this view that Abraham pitched a series of tents for people to use for lodging, and that was the establishment of the Eshel. Janie.
Just for information, I looked up tamarisk on
Okay.
Google for what
And-
kind of tree it is, and it doesn't fit in with either of those. What they
What kind-
say is it is an invasive shrub or small tree that is found across the American West, also known as salt cedar. Tamarisk favors sites that are inhospitable to native streamside plants because of high salinity, low water availability, and altered stream flow regimes created by dams.
Fascinating. So you're correct that a shrub or a bush isn't going to produce fruit or much to help guests. So
On
not-
the other hand, if it's a bush that grows where there's low water availability, that may be part of trying to green the desert.
Mhm. Yeah, I don't know how this translation, got from Eshel to that particular tree. I didn't look it up, but an encyclopedia of biblical vegetation, which might give us more accuracy or more of a broader sort of perspective on what this Eshel might have been. But at least through the world of Midrash, right?
I have a different definition.
I'm sorry.
I have a different definition than
Oh,
Jamie's.
what did you find?
That the genus Tamarex is composed of about 50 to 60 species of flowering plants in the family Tamaris. Don't know how to pronounce it. Native to the drier areas of Eurasia and Africa. The generic name originated in maybe to the Tamaris River in Hispania in Spain, but so somewhat of a different definition than Janie's, but it does grow by dry areas.
Okay, so it would fit that Abraham was planting these if he was in, Mamre, if he was in the plains of the desert, right? That would be the kind of thing he would be planting. The question is, what's the significance of the thing which he was planting? Was it about, fruit? Was it about sustenance for the guests? Or was it about, lodging and shelter, for the guests? Those seem to be the two, sort of options that Rav and Shmuel are giving here.
One of the things, though, but when you're planting something, especially like a tree, which doesn't just grow overnight, it suggests a certain permanence. That if Abraham was nomadic, if he was traveling and moving the tent from place to place, and he's in the desert and he's got animals that have to graze and he's got to move different places. The fact that he's planting something means that he plans to stay in one place, I would think.
It's a great point. And the Pasuk says, Vayagar Abraham be'eretz Plishtim yamim rabim. That Abraham did this because he was planning to stay in this location for a long time. And so it seems like Abraham, after everything that happens in our Parsha, is settling down a bit. And
Was this in Israel?
Yep, this
Okay.
is all right. This is in Israel, and this is near Beersheba. And that's where Abraham planted this Eshel in Beersheba, and that's where he lived for the remainder of his life. So even though he had nomadic lifestyle until now, the planting of these trees signify that things are settling down a bit. And I want to come back to that point in a minute. But first, I want to try to appreciate what was done with these with this Eshel. So the remainder of the pasuk says that he planted this in Beersheba, Vayikra Sham b'Shem Hashem El Olam, and in that place he called out to the name of God as the eternal God, as the God of the world, as the God of Olam can also mean, permanent or forever. And so what is the connection between this planting and the publicity of God in the world? And so the Zohar, which is quoted by the Al-Sheikh, connects the dots. And I'll read this in source number 3. Lefi ma she'amru b'sefer hazohar ve'al hishanu tachat ha'etz. What it says in the Zohar about that Abraham dwelled underneath the tree. Shekach hayot darko shel Abraham. This was the method of Abraham. Shahayalo eitz. He had a tree. Shetachtav hayam ma'achil orchim. Underneath the tree, he would feed his guests. Ulami shahaya kole ta'ilan haya mavchin echuto. And the person who was underneath the ilan, underneath the tree, would want to understand a little bit more about its value. Ubezeh yomar kigam sham nata eshel hu ilan, and this is why Abraham planted trees in Beersheba called Eshel. Va'ayadei hachil tachtav orchim hayakorei b'shem Hashem. He would engage the guests in conversation, using their curiosity about these trees to talk about the origin of these trees and to eventually get to talking about the creator of the world as God. Shamar hayu mazkirin shem Hashem, because the pasuk says he planted these trees, and the purpose of them was eventually to get to a point where he was doing kiruv, he was broadcasting the name of God to the world. Shetchila lo hayu shehu al el olam ki'im shal shamayim kevodo. Because in the beginning, the people did not know that there was a monotheistic God of the world, and through Abraham's efforts, with all of his hospitality, he spread the word about it. So these trees were connected to the calling out of God's name in the world because they were ultimately mechanisms of teaching and of educating everyone around him about the ways of ethical monotheism. So with all of that in mind, I want to take a look now at the opening scene of our Parsha, to sort of look at the bookends of our Parsha and to appreciate differently what is going on in terms of the place that Abraham entertains his guests as the Parsha opens. Okay, so I did some bolding here to help direct and focus our attention on the specific locations in which Abraham is doing the hospitality. And we're going to keep in mind what Abraham was doing at the end of the Parsha with creating these eshels, which were either trees or they were tents, lodgings for guests. Okay, so let's do a quick read here. Vayera elav Hashem be'elonei Mamre. So Hashem appeared to Abraham in the plains of Mamre. V'hu yoshev petach ha'ohel kachom hayom. And where was Abraham sitting?
At the entrance.
At the entrance of the tent. Okay, so here he's at the entrance to his tent. Vayisa einav vayar. He picked up his eyes and he saw 3 people walking towards him. With great alacrity, he runs to them. From the entrance of his tent again. And he prostrates before them in deference. And he says to them, my masters. The word Adonai here is a bit ambiguous, which is why the Sefaria puts Adoshem. It could be referring to either God or to the guests. And he says to them, if you found favor in my eyes, al na ta'avor mi'alav dacha. Don't pass by here. Don't leave. Stop and stay a while. Yukach na me'at ma'im v'rachtu raglechem. Take water, wash your feet. V'ishanu tachat ha'etz. And recline and lean. Take shade underneath the tree. Ve'akcha pat lechem. And I'll give you some bread. V'sadu libchem. You can satisfy your heart. Sachar ta'avoru. This is why you're here. They agree, they consent to being hosted by him. So Abraham goes from where to where? From the tree back to the tent, El Sarah, where his wife is. He gives marching orders to do a lot of baking. Abraham, he goes and gets some meat. Going to the next pasuk, then he brings the stuff back from the tent to the tree where they are eating. And they ask, well, where's your wife? We have some news to share about her, some good news about her giving birth to a child. And he says, he says, she is back in the tent. And they say to him, to Abraham, when we return to you a year from now, your wife will be a mother. And she remains in the tent, but hears from there. So we see that there is a lot of referencing here to place. Right? Oftentimes we appreciate other components of the story, the pace of it, the rushing to make guests feel comfortable. But here, through this lens, we're appreciating that there is a lot of movement back and forth between the tent and the tree. The tree seems to be the primary place in which the hospitality is had. The tent is the private domain where the cooking takes place, where Abraham's wife is, and the tree is what provides shade. It's what provides some nurture for the guests. So the question that I have is what changes between the beginning of the Parsha and the end of the Parsha? At the beginning of the Parsha, we see that Abraham hosts using a single tree and also operating out of his own ohel, out of his own tent. At the end of the Parsha, we see that Abraham is planting an orchard. He's planting many, many trees, or he is pitching many tents. So what is the difference between A and B? Between the hospitality that he provides, the personalized hospitality he provides at the beginning of the Parsha, and the more, let's call it, larger scale commercial hospitality that he's setting up to provide like an inn, right? A bed and breakfast, a hotel at the end of the Parsha.
I have an idea.
What do you think?
Yeah, that he anticipates more people coming through and him affecting them, teaching them about ethical monotheism.
Okay, good. So the scale has changed, right?
Yeah.
It used to be that this was being done sort of as a mom and pop shop. It was just a few people walking by, but over the years, Avraham grew his enterprise into a corporation that had a much bigger reach, and so he couldn't do everything out of his own kitchen anymore. He needed to build more infrastructure. I think that's a great insight. Any other suggestions or ideas for what shifted in Abraham's hospitality techniques?
I was also going to suggest that perhaps he got a little more affluent after being there, and he grew it proportionally, or he just, because he shared.
Great. So he had more resources and he was able to scale up because he had more to give. He used, his wealth to spread, to spread the word of God. And so that's another great suggestion. Any other suggestions?
It just reminds me of, I don't remember the name of the movie, but that says, if you build it, they will come.
Yeah, Field of Dreams. Yeah.
Dreams.
Okay. So indeed, he wants to grow his reach, and so he wants to build a mega inn or a mega orchard, so that now he has a much greater capacity, right? And so now that he's settling down, he feels like he can do more. He can use his resources. So I'm going to just share one more possibility here, which is getting back to where we started, which is what changed for Abraham as a family man between the beginning and the end of the Parsha.
He's becoming a father.
Bingo. He has a child. He has Yitzchak. That's what happens between the beginning of the Parsha, where the guests come and say, you're going to become a father through Sarah, and the end of the Parsha, where, after the Akedah, he knows that Yitzchak is there to stay. Perhaps, and again, this is, speculative and a little bit of a response to the psychoanalytic approach of Dr. Skolnick, perhaps Avraham moved the hospitality from the privacy of his own tent to outside the home because he wanted more boundaries between his work and his family so he could be a better father.
That is a very interesting view. I was going to suggest that perhaps there was some different synergy between him and Sarah at
Say
the time.
more.
Any more synergy between him and Sarah, and they said, maybe we can grow that, and this is how we're going to do it. It could have been her influence. Who knows?
Yeah. Rashi says that the two of them were a tag team duo, and they did all of this together. And so even though from the opening scene, it makes it appear that Sarah was behind the scenes and Abraham was, out in front, that the two of them really worked together on this effort, that Sarah spoke to the women and Abraham spoke to the men. And the two of them had incredible outreach to large swaths of, the population in the Middle East at the time. My sort of creative read here is to suggest it's a pretty modern read, which is to say that hospitality is a great thing for us to be doing, but at the same time, our children come first. And some might argue that what better way to teach our children about Jewish values than to bring guests into the home. And that's a lovely thought and a beautiful idea, but in practice, it really doesn't work because you can only have a conversation with one person at a time. And at least in my home, we try very hard to at least have one meal every Shabbos without guests because our children need our attention. And they want to share about what they did during the week and their Parsha projects, right? And it oftentimes gets to be too much when you have guests and lots of children wanting attention and wanting to share what they do and what they're thinking about. And so sometimes, it's appropriate to have some appropriate boundaries, to have, a certain pattern where you host guests maybe every other Shabbos, right? At different stages of life, different things are possible. And so when Abraham and Sarah are a young couple of 99 and 90, right? And they don't have kids yet, they can host in their home as much as they need, right? Even at a minute's notice, they can just, turn on the grill and, and bake some bread and host, without it affecting their family dynamic too much. But after Sarah gives birth to a child, right, it's a little bit harder. And so Abraham wants to continue the hospitality, but maybe he builds an inn, down the road. And he operates, out of the inn instead of out of the home. And perhaps that's, a way in which Abraham indeed was a great father. And, clearly there was some friction between him and Ishmael, him and Yitzchak, because of what was asked of him. But perhaps we can try to see Abraham as a caring, nurturing father who was exemplary in terms of his capacity to realize that he needed to, care for his son Yitzchak by being present, at home and not always entertaining guests at home.
Mm-hmm. Do you know when Muslim boys get their breasts? What age?
It's not as far as I know, there's no age. It's just it needs to be done anytime after birth.
Oh, okay. I didn't know if it might have been the same age Ishmael was when he had his.
Ishmael was 13. That's clear from the psukim.
Yeah.
Yeah. So what do we think of this theory? It's a little bit innovative, a little bit modern to sort of look at boundaries between home and work life. But I think it fits well with with at least my life right now, and and also with appreciating the lengths which we should be going to do hospitality. Even if it's difficult and challenging, even if we're physically recovering from something, we can still open our homes to somebody. Even if we're in the middle of a war, we can still have people over. But there are also limits, right? And if our children or our siblings or our spouses need us, that should come first. But there can be a balance. That's not always an either or, but Abraham figured out a way to do both. Sarah, you were going to say something.
I'm just curious about you have a baby and there's a protective nature that happens.
Mm-hmm.
Like, don't get too close. And there's a biological thing, that parents biologically need to protect their babies. So I'm just curious about that piece of it also. I think it definitely fits into what you're saying. It's like an and, not an or. But yeah, that's what I was thinking about. It just in terms of
we see, sorry to cut you off there, but we see that Sarah has a special relationship with Yitzchak, which is celebrated when the special relationship is nursing him, right? That the Torah says that she eventually weaned him, which we understand biblically to be referring to the time when you stop breastfeeding and the child can now eat independently, right? And so that took years, right? And so that milestone, is noted in the Parsha. So that just, sort of underscores the point you're making, that the maternal bond and the parental bond is much more, sort of involved during the earlier stages of life. And so, before Yitzchak is born and after Yitzchak is born, the style of hospitality needs to change. Now, it might change back when Yitzchak is a grown man and out of the house, right? But during those interim years, there is a sort of a shift in Abraham's hospitality conduct.
And these
I think,
people that are coming, it's not like guests that we invite over that we know. He doesn't know them. They're like wandering in the desert, you know, it could be anybody.
it's a big risk.
Yeah. Is it true that there's something to do with idol worshiping and washing the feet, washing the dust off the feet?
Yeah, Rashi quotes a midrash that the reason why he gave them water to wash their feet is because there were dust worshippers in the desert, and he wanted to make sure that these were not they. And so he had them wash the dust off their feet to make sure that they, sort of understood that they're not in, in the territory where they should be worshiping dust.
Yeah, thank you.
Totally.
And I was just going to add, Sarah, you're talking about that close maternal relationship, and Midrash says that's what caused, I think, Sarah's death in next parsha. That Satan in the form of the snake, I think, came and told Sarah that Yitzchak had died at the stake.
I'm not sure if it was a snake, but the midrash says it was the Satan. It was the, yeah. Jill.
You talk about Sarah and having her baby and taking care of the baby. What about the theory or the philosophy? If you're a parent all your life, when they grow up, you're still a parent.
Yeah, that relationship never changes.
Never changes.
Even though it evolves.
Sometimes.
Yeah. Indeed, it's a important point to make, that even after Yitzchak is weaned and even after Yitzchak leaves the home, the maternal bond is still there.
Always.
And that's part of the reason why Abraham gets really concerned after Sarah dies about his son's well-being and immediately tries to find him a spouse. Not to replace, because that's impossible, but to at least offer some supplementary emotional support now that his mom is not there for him.
I think when you join the Israeli army, they ask you if there's other kids. I think you're not allowed to join if you're an only child.
Yes.
You're allowed to if you get your parents' written permission. So I've been in that situation with families in our show before who have asked whether or not they should sign the document. So it's not automatic. You're not drafted automatically. It's contingent upon parental agreement.
Do you think YU and Stern right now are the two physically safest colleges for kids?
I don't want to go way off course right now. I want to try to stick to the parsha.
And I just one thing that's totally a tangent, but it's in the writings that you shared. It always blows me away that they prepared a calf and then served it with cottage cheese.
Yeah, or butter or whatever.
Whatever it was, yeah. And it's right there, it's so clear. There is no kashrut right now.
Yeah, it's before, the laws of kashrut were given. And in past years, we've taken, a closer look at that conundrum to unpack it and understand, was it that they had the dairy before the meat, which is a very anachronistic read, or just to say that these rules of kashrut were not in play yet, which is the more historical read. But I'd laugh or chuckle every time and hope my kids don't notice when they read that.
I wonder also if did Muslims eat milk and meat together? Is that true or not true? Do Muslims eat cheeseburgers?
I believe they do.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's not one of the restrictions that they have. There are many others under the halal. Yeah. Okay, well, I appreciate everyone tuning in and sharing insights and thoughts. It really fills my day to learn Parsha together. And so I hope this helps us think about hospitality this week, and maybe trying to reach out and, trying to extend ourselves a bit beyond what we typically do for the Parsha related to this topic. So wish everyone a wonderful day, and stay safe, stay strong.
Have a
Thank
good
you,
day.
Rabbi.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody.
Okay, come on down, check the one.